Welcome to this landmark episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit Show, episode number 20. I am your host, Mark Hasara, and for over 60 years, my passion has been aviation. I was a KC-135 pilot in the United States Air Force for over 24 years, and I love all things aviation. You ask any pilot to define flying, and they're probably going to tell you long periods of boredom interrupted by short intermittent periods of extreme terror. On our show, we debrief the most fascinating and intriguing pilots, aircrew members, maintainers, and aviation enthusiasts from all over the world. Our show investigates the lessons learned from the tactics, techniques, and procedures these aviators created or cultivated during those extreme and extraordinary military, commercial, and private flying operations. This exploration gives you, our listeners, practical advice on how does the aviation world work and expands critical thinking skills and expertise in the air and on the ground. Many of the stories you're going to hear on this show are being told for the very first time. Special thanks to Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar for sponsoring this 20th episode of our show. On today's show, we are going to talk to a former F-16 pilot in the United States Air Force who flew missions over Iraq, also a T-38 instructor. Man, was that a fun airplane to fly when I was in training. Everybody loved flying the White Rocket. And we're going to hear the story of how she learned that she'd been accepted to fly with the prestigious United States Air Force demonstration team, the Thunderbirds. Get ready to talk to Blaise Jensen. So, grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the Lessons from the Cockpit Show. Blaise, it's great to have you on. Good morning.
Good morning, Sluggo. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you here. I'm looking at your wall back there with your wings and your helmet, yeah. Both helmets. Okay. Obviously one from the Thunderbirds, another one from, looks like Hill, the Rams.
That one is my aggressor helmet, actually. From Dallas Air Force Base. Yeah.
Excellent. Obviously, you have a lot of lessons learned from your career. Why don't you just explain real quick, how did you get started in flying? And a little bit about your career in the Air Force.
Sounds great. I think really the first time I remember wanting to become a pilot, I was around 6 years old and I was supposed to be in bed and my tummy hurt. And I went down the stairs and, my sisters were asleep and my parents were watching a movie and I had a biplane and it was flying around like these building cumulonimbus. And like the idea of being in the clouds just like took me. And I had all these questions about like, can you walk on them? Like, is it like hitting a brick wall? Like I'd never been in the air, but my father was a helicopter pilot and flew during Vietnam and he was still flying, I think Hueys at the time. So, my dad would leave home and go fly. And so it was something I always wanted to do. I was probably around 12, 13 years old. I saw the Thunderbirds fly at an air show in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And when those jets go by and you can feel that thunder like in your chest. I was like, I want to do that more than anything else in the world. And I found out women weren't allowed to fly in combat. So that was a little disheartening. But my father told me to make sure that I stick with it. And he gave me the example of the World War II WASP.
Yeah.
Saying, hey, you do everything you need to do, like do good in school, seek out those leadership opportunities in the community, church, and on your sports teams. I did that. My first time I went up in an airplane, I was 15 years old in a Cessna 172, which I loved to death. It was like amazing, but we didn't have a whole lot of money to be able to do flying lessons. I flew to and from the Air Force Academy for a swimming camp. So those were the second, third times I flew. And the fourth time I ever was on an airplane was my flight to the Air Force Academy for basic training. And I knew in my heart I was going to be a fighter pilot. It was probably very naive of me, but it worked out. So I started flying gliders there.
It worked out very well.
Yes, it did. So that was the genesis of my real flying. I learned how to fly first on a Schweitzer 233 and teach other cadets how to fly and get them to solo. So it's pretty cool. I feel very fortunate.
Outstanding. And then you went right into F-16s and flew at Kunsan.
No, I actually, after I graduated from pilot
Yeah.
training, I came right back. I was a first assignment instructor pilot. We
Oh,
call that a FAPE. So I flew
okay.
the T-38, and that's an amazing experience teaching being 20, like early 20s, teaching other early 20-year-olds how to fly an advanced jet. And a T-38 especially is like very unforgiving and a little bit underpowered, especially in Southwest Texas where it gets really, really hot.
hmm
So it was just an amazing way to build airmanship and awareness and just become a really fantastic pilot.
Loved the T-38. Oh my
It's a
gosh.
great plane. It's my first love.
Yeah, I think everybody that went through pilot training and went from T-37s to T-38s will say the same thing. Even when we were in pilot training, they said, yeah, T-37 is fun, but wait till you get to the T-38 and you're doing
Yeah.
formation, T-38 formation.
Oh, the first time, sorry,
Go
I
ahead.
didn't
First
mean to
time?
interrupt, but the
No.
first time you light that afterburner and take off, and the departure in Del Rio, like you took off and you did a 180-degree turn and you're just abeam the field and you're at 10,000 feet already. And it was like unbelievable,
Yeah.
and then fly like a F-16 with a Pratt and Whitney 225 engine and you're at 10,000 feet within like, feels like not even, 10 seconds off the end of the
Yeah.
runway. So it just, things are getting more and more powerful, but that feeling of lighting an afterburner for the first time is pretty special.
Yeah. I'll never forget that either. Because our first ride was our supersonic ride. Things get real quiet in the jet. And I go, okay, there it is. Look at that. Look at the airspeed indicator. Okay. Yeah, there it is. Seriously. In formation, when you lit the afterburner, particularly when you're doing it at night. Oh, geez.
Yeah.
That's a picture that will never go away in our minds, will it? And
It's those things that you wish you could share with people. Like some of the images that you get that just stick with you. And you're like, in that moment, you're like, very few people get to witness this. Like, how lucky are we that we get to be witness to this?
absolutely. It was just a fun jet to fly. I finished early. I didn't finish well, but I finished. Okay. It was going to be 2 weeks before I could go off to KC-135 school. So I had to go out by myself to keep landing currency. Oh, Dad's giving me the keys to the jet. Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're like going, oh, this is going to be fun. And I remember thinking to myself, this is my very last flight in this airplane, more than likely in my career. Enjoy it. Enjoy the feeling, the G's, enjoy being upside down in a supersonic trainer. And it was like, I went to Vance, Enid by the Sea.
Yeah.
And of course we had big thunderstorms and everything too. But I remember when the air got really wet and going extended trail and the ribbons coming off of the wings. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Isn't that wonderful?
Well, and like you said, images that you and I have in our minds, you really can't convey in words.
No.
Then from T-38s, you went to?
I went to fly F-16s in Korea at Kunsan for 35th Fighter Squadron, push it up, Pantons.
Uh-huh.
That was like language immersion, but for flying fighters, because you were literally in a foreign country, but you were isolated almost on this base. There were no spouses that came with any of us. And so you lived in dorms and you literally ate, drank, slept, played. Everything was fighters. Like you'd come home at night and you could hear the weapons officer across the hall giving someone some academics on how to do their first instructor ride the next day. And you were always in it all the time. And it was such a great environment to get to really learn your craft there for a whole year in Korea.
Total immersion.
Yep. Complete immersion, just like throwing you into France and learn how to speak French, but learn how to speak fighter pilot.
And you probably got to fly a lot too, didn't you?
This is kind of funny. I did because I had been a FAPE first. So I had 1,500 hours when I got to the F-16. So it was a relatively small amount of time I needed in the F-16 to be considered experienced. And the year that I was in Korea, the weather was heinous. Like we had sorties where we would take off, go into the weather at 301. You wouldn't break out to like 35,000 feet. You're in radar trail the whole time, hoping your radar doesn't freeze up or you lose, because you cannot see anybody outside of your airplane, your complete IMC. And then you'd come back in and you'd fly down to 301 and land. So I had a good weather category. I could fly with really bad weather. And I would be sitting in the vault and doing my studying of my classified material. And they'd be like, Blaze to the ops desk. And I'm like, but I'm about to go just fly and log a lot of IMC time. That happened quite a bit. And we had like a huge snowstorm at the end. I briefed one mission on doing tactical intercepts like 7 times. So I think there's still like a string you can pull on the back of my head and that tactical intercept briefing will come out. So, but it was great because when the weather was good, we would do like big, large force engagements and we'd work with the Korean F-5s. You know, a lot of the times we flew, like almost every single Friday, you'd be airborne with, you know, about 24 aircraft. So, and, you know, flying in the weather is really important. And when you're not in combat, and even when you are, those admin phases of flight, that's where a lot of the really bad stuff happens.
Yeah.
So we got really good at the administrative radar trail recoveries and departures and flying in fingertip formation in the weather and just keeping awareness with the radios because you didn't always have your eyeballs to understand where everybody else was in your formation and in the flight. They were tough lessons learned, but really good ones.
See, I remember the war day, the PACAF war day that we'd always have once a month. We'd go up to Korea with 12 F-15s and 4 tankers and the AWACS and everything. Oh, it was such great training, though. Mm-hmm. It was great training. We would fuel the F-16s, the F-15s, and the AWACS. And yeah, I remember those days. Oh, God, that was great. Yeah. That was probably by far my best flying assignment was being in PACAF, by far. Because like you said, you got to fly a lot. You became a really, really good instrument pilot.
And I was very fortunate because I got to upgrade to flight lead and I was only there for 1 year and I got to leave Korea as a flight lead, which is really rare for a first year fighter pilot or especially in the F-16. But because I had that solid foundation of being a first assignment instructor pilot, I was able to upgrade before I left Korea.
So then you went to Hill Air Force Base and flew with the Rams?
I flew with the Fujians. They're the 4th Fighter Squadron. Okay. Yep. And then I was there for maybe a year. Was given the job as a flight commander, and we pretty quickly after that deployed to Iraq, to Balad Air Base. That was fantastic.
Was it?
Yeah, it really was.
Tell us about that. Tell us about flying out of Balad. What year was this? What time frame was this? 2007
into 2008. We were the very first squadron to get to fly with the Laser Maverick, and the 422 test squadron at Nellis hadn't even flown with it yet. I think they maybe did like 1 or 2 just to make sure that it jived with all the systems on the aircraft. So we were having to make up some of our own tactics to be able to employ the weapon. And it was really needed because there were a lot of Al-Qaeda was driving up to concerned citizen checkpoints or other places and doing kind of like drive-by terror and killing, innocent civilians that way. So they needed a vehicle to be able to stop vehicles that were moving back then. So we were one of the first squadrons with that. We also had ARC-210 radios. There was a lot of jamming going on, and honestly, it was probably us jamming ourselves. But we had ARC-210 radios, and that allowed us a lot of different ways to speak with the ground controllers and the joint terminal attack controllers. So they always loved us because we could actually communicate well, because we could hear them and they could hear us. We had the ear plugs that were molded to our ears for the first time that went, straight into your ears. So you had a lot better sound because the F-16s, like fighter jets, are really loud.
Yeah.
And we had the helmet mounted cueing system too. We also flew with sniper pods. So we had all the toys when we got there.
All the really cool toys.
Yep. And
were you in a Block 42 jet with the big HUD and everything too?
Yeah, Block 42.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you had all kinds of cool imagery and
but
what's it like flying with the helmet? The company I work for, Rockwell Collins, makes the helmet and makes the ARC-210 radio. So this is a great advertisement for that radio because I agree with you. It's a fantastic radio.
Yeah, it was really, really wonderful. So the helmets, and this was kind of an interesting story, right? Because when we were deploying, you had to have day guys and night guys. And I use guys as in humans. We actually had 3 women that deployed with me, which was a lot. And my commander used to get teased by the other commanders on base, and they asked him how his harem was doing. But they were all jealous because
not to be politically incorrect or anything.
No, but the JTACs loved us because they knew like we would get the job done, and we were very, very well respected. So it was all in good fun, and they were probably a little jealous too that they didn't have their own, chicks on their team.
Yeah.
No, but when we deployed, when we were leading up to the deployment, we're like, oh, we got day guys and night guys, and we divided everybody into half. And we got to Iraq, and I was a day guy. And my flight took off at sunset and I flew at night. So you had people who flew predominantly during the day, like they would take off after sunrise and then they'd fly all day. Well, my go started at sunset. And so I'd take off with this very expensive, I think they were like $80,000 to $100,000 helmet mounted cueing system. Flying into the sun is absolutely no fun. And it felt like in Iraq, the sun took up like a third of the sky. So you're always flying into the sun, and then it goes down. And now you have to take out this $80,000 helmet mounted cueing system that had, I think it was like 40 pins or something inside that had to be seated just right. And oh, by the way, there's no replacements. You're not getting more. So don't bend a pin. Carefully put that away. You're not taking off your helmet. You're trying to now put on a visor type thing that's a bracket that holds your night vision goggles, and then put on your night vision goggles without like bumping them and unfocusing them because you had them focused.
All while you're flying the jet.
On a tanker too, usually. So or just leaving the tanker. And
how complicated can we make this?
Right. And you talk about your crew resource management or your operational, those score for how much risk are you willing to accept? And you're willing to accept a lot because people's lives are at stake, our friendlies and civilians. So we did it. We got really great at it, but it was a real shock when you first got there. Like, oh wait, I barely had night currency, and now I'm rehacking it over Iraq in a single engine airplane. So it was really wonderful though, and it was it was a really fun challenge, and just like this weird time of day to be flying, and that's when bad guys like to do bad things too, as the kind of cover of nightfall comes down and they can't be seen,
or so they think.
Right. Yeah. Because the sniper pod with an IR system, you can see quite a bit. There's like some thermal crossover time when everything's kind of the same temperature, but as it starts to divide, you can see a lot with the sniper and lightning pods. They're really effective. That's
incredible. And then of course the helmet, you can turn your head and all the sensors in the airplane look with it, correct?
It depends. So that was something that was crazy, right? I trained with this helmet and I can designate, that truck over there, and I can look through my helmet and I can get a visual with it. You don't have that at night. You had to take off your HEMIX. Oh. So you lose the television mode on your pod, and you lost the ability to cue your system visually with your helmet. So yes and no. It was great. And it's even better now. You can, cue other air-to-air missiles off of it. And there's a lot of fantastic different modes to be able to use it. But so it was like this huge transition in technology and visual acuity and some sensory deprivation at night. And it's a completely different cross-check. So again, these like big challenges that make you a really great pilot.
You said sensory deprivation. That's an interesting comment. What do you mean when you say that? So that listeners will understand what you mean by the sensory deprivation.
Well, just the visual acuity of, like, depending on how much moon illumination you had or when the moonrise was, sometimes you can't even see a horizon, right? You could be looking down, but in your peripheral vision in an airplane, you can still see like the tilt of the earth as long as you're not in the weather. And so at night, you lose all that, especially if you're flying over areas that are sparsely populated, but there's a little bit of light. The sky with the stars at night can really blend with a couple of cultural lights on the ground, and you lose the sense of where up and down is unless you have a really good cross check where you're looking at your attitude indicator and your backup attitude indicator and your heads up display. So it just takes a lot more energy to even know like which way is up.
I'm so glad you talked about that, because a lot of young pilots don't understand that, and don't understand that particularly out over the desert, because we flew out over the desert. I mean, on the food desert of Saudi Arabia. And there'd be all those little king cab trucks running around. Okay. And I remember telling my co-pilot, look down, look up, and tell me the difference. And it was like, well, the instruments are telling me we're right side up. That's where you really, really had to trust your instruments. My instructor in T-38s would say, instruments be your friend. Okay. Because flying at night like that, particularly when we were out over the ocean, it was the same way.
Yeah.
It was a total loss of, sometimes you like, oh, okay, well, where am I? And then you throw in a thunderstorm. Crazy.
Yeah. Like a tanker in the F-16 in combat, the targeting pod was on the right side. They call it a chin mount. It's on the right side of the jet, and we're in a right-hand turn. And so, especially at night when you don't have a horizon, your vestibular system ends up centering. So it thinks a 30-degree right-hand bank turn is level when you can't see the horizon, or you don't have something to go off of, or you don't continuously remind yourself where you are. And then you're trying to stay in an altitude block, and we would separate. So we'd each have we'd have a 2000 altitude block, and we each have 500 feet to stay in. So you'd use your autopilot a little bit to help you, and some other systems in the jet to let you know if you got low, but so it was a lot just to stay. And then you're in that right-hand turn constantly. And we kind of joke, it's like hours and hours, and maybe sometimes even days of boredom, just punctuated by, minutes of sheer exertion. And, all of a sudden in no time flat, things get really exciting. You need to expect the unexpected. And it's when you're the most tired and you finally decided to drink your Gatorade or use a piddle pack or something, that everything will just kick off. So you're always prepared for everything, even when you're in complete boredom. So it's good to keep your mind trained and caged and ready to go.
I tell people the real definition of flying is long periods of boredom interrupted by short intermittent periods of extreme terror.
Exactly.
And only people that have flown understand that. Understand that.
Yeah.
So were you guys dropping a lot of bombs during that time period? Were you guys really active during that time period? Because that's right after the surge.
We were there in the surge. Yep.
Okay.
And to make matters more surge, I think it was the F-15s got grounded. They had some mishap where an F-15 broke apart in flight, and I'd have to go back and research.
The one in Missouri.
So they grounded all the Eagles. We're
right behind the cockpit, if I remember right. It just snapped.
So I was working in the KAOC when that happened, working all the tanker assignments. We could go to Qatar for 2 weeks, which was a nice break because you love everybody, but it was nice to get out of there and see something different and meet other people and drink a beer once in a while too, because it wasn't a dry country.
Yeah.
So we really picked up a lot of extra work too there, but we were there during the surge, and the squadron that went before us didn't. I think that one guy dropped one bomb, and in our squadron, I think everyone had a chance to do some kind of employment. There were a lot of IEDs being planted, so we spent a lot of time looking for that. Balad was called Mortaritaville because we were getting mortared on an almost daily basis. I was asleep one morning and awoken by a huge explosion. What woke me up is that I couldn't breathe, and it was close enough that the concussive force took the air out of your lungs.
Yeah.
I was totally fine, I think, after that. But, we'd wear our Kevlar and our helmets and everywhere that we went on base, and you carried a sidearm, and we were very busy, and, the enemy was very busy as well. So we did employ quite a bit.
So what kind of a load were you guys carrying? Were you carrying Mavericks and GBU-12s and things like that, or?
We had a mixed load. We had 500-pound LGBs, and we were carrying a Brew, so it could carry 2 weapons. The wingman, you're testing my memory here. We carried, I feel like we carried AMRAAMs.
Yeah.
Got the load out right there. We carried AMRAAMs, 2 500-pound laser guided bombs.
Yeah.
And then we also carried, I think the wingman carried a laser Maverick, and they carried 2 500-pound JDAMs. And one of them was a low collateral damage weapon. Because we had, people in houses, the enemy, Al Qaeda in houses, were collecting all of their IED materials and then dispersing them. And so we had, but it was they were fairly close to other homes. So we had weapons that we could drop with a delay that would penetrate and not have a big explosion, so that we could protect, other structures around it and other citizens around those. So the laser MAV, the 2 laser guided bombs, and then 2 JDAMs.
Yeah.
So
that's a pretty good loadout for.
Yeah. And, and it was, so we had the mix. So the wingman always shot the laser Maverick, but the flight lead would guide it in. Everything was a team. And I think that's kind of one of my biggest lessons. Even when you're a single seat, you're never alone, right? You always have that teammate there. Yeah. You're never alone unless your radio is completely out and your electronics completely quit. And even then we still have a way to connect with that other aircraft with visual signals. And we have plans that this is how we're going to get home. This is how you're going to land safely. And this is how I'm going to let you know visually that there's a problem with one of the systems of my aircraft. So, but you're always, even though you're piloting your own aircraft, you're always a team with at least one other jet, your wingman. So that wingman concept, I think, is really important as a fighter. It was definitely during training. That's why you hear it so much, because what a great life concept too. Even when you feel like you're alone and you think you're alone, you're never alone.
And you're also working with people on the ground too at the same time.
Exactly.
You're doing all this stuff.
Yeah. Oh, and then, I mean, and like the tankers and my crew chiefs, like the people most excited to see a bomb missing from my wing was like, I went to the tanker for like to refill, because we'd be airborne for 45 or for 4 hours, and we'd have to take gas about every 45 minutes to an hour and pull back up on the tanker. And the boomer was like, oh my gosh, man, like, look at that. Like, tell me all about it, you know? And then I land, and I mean, the crew chiefs are practically doing like backflips, and there's lanyards when you drop the laser guided bombs, they have little rings. And I gave those rings to my crew chief too when I landed, because it's as much his mission, and he enabled it just as much as I did in the cockpit. I think you tend to, especially as a fighter pilot, you're on the pointy end, but you wouldn't be there at all if it wasn't for that troop who's paying your paycheck, and the one who's, you know, working at the mess hall, and, you know, the guys who are turning the wrenches and putting the gas in the jets, and, you know, working in the tower to let you take off, or working in the control center to keep you deconflicted. Like, it's a huge effort with the US and our allies, but especially those JTACs on the ground. So much respect for them.
And sometimes they were talking very calmly, and sometimes those JTACs were not so calm, were they?
Well, you know, that's the thing too, right? When pilots were trained, like, oh, my engine's on fire, and you're like, holy cow. Sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing. Yeah. Just wait, make sure you know which engine it is, make sure you know the entirety of the problem. But it's the same thing with the JTACs, and they were almost always like cool, calm, and collected. And when you would hear their octave go up a little bit, and you could hear the tension in your voice, like you knew they needed you. And then it was my job too, to be as calm as possible. And I tell you what, like, we were trained. There was nothing that you could throw at us that we couldn't solve. Things wouldn't go perfect, but we were able to always.
It never does.
And you have to be prepared for that. We had the training that we needed, and that's why we went by the call sign Ninja. We were the crew chief's like favorite fighters to work with. They'd call Ninja Flight all the time. You know, people would be like, why did you guys get to go to all those troops in contact situations? Like, they know us. They know that we get the job done. And one unit showed up and they dropped a bomb and it dudded. And they were trying to blow up like a vehicle-borne IED, I think, somewhere. And they didn't want to work with them anymore. Like, let's call Ninja. You know, we've had all the toys. We had the best way to key all the systems and sensors to the target, and we got it done.
Isn't that a great life lesson too? You always go to your best shooters when things go to hell. You're always going to go to your best shooters. I've got to tell you something. I don't think there was ever a boom operator I didn't fly with who would see a jet come up and go, there's a bomb missing. There's a missile missing. That is so cool. That is so cool. You know, of course, in the tanker, we have the boom interphone system. You'd plug into us, you know, and that would be one of the things that they'd ask. What did you do? How did you do it? Where'd the bomb go? What did you drop it on?
Yeah.
And we could hear that banter back and forth. It was always very satisfying. I mean, you talk about job satisfaction. And like you said, a team effort. All right.
Yeah.
So you're up filling up with gas, asking the boom operators, asking over the interphone. Up front, we'd stay quiet because, you know, they're bantering back and forth. The boom is talking to you. You know, they say, okay, like, what did you do? Where'd the bomb go?
Yeah.
I see a bomb gone. I see a bomb gone. What'd you do? And that was always, that always raised the hair on the back of my neck. It's like, ooh, we're doing real stuff now.
Yes, for sure.
We're doing real stuff now. Okay.
Yeah. I would have had to land after an hour if it hadn't been for my tanker. You know, we just didn't have that much gas. So, I mean, maybe 2 hours sometimes if you hold like higher and, you know, you can conserve fuel, but you needed to have gas. So you had to, like, your bingos and were really high to get home.
And see, people don't understand. Nobody kicks ass without tanker gas. Nobody.
Yeah. I literally just said that yesterday.
Did you really?
Yeah. And I was in a panel and I said that.
People don't think about the logistics of you flying that airplane, though. And the logistics of you flying that airplane is that airplane right here on the wall behind me, this big tanker. Yeah, sometimes it was boring, but sometimes we would turn in to the Fight Freak and listen to what was going on. It was pretty amazing. I would teach my guys and gals listen to the fight freak, because you never know when you may have to leave your orbit to go get them. And on numerous occasions, we saved a lot of airplanes because of low on fuel and everything. We talked to a guy the other day, had 300 pounds in his F4 when he hooked up to the boom. He had a minute and 25 seconds left before his engines flamed out in the F4, you know. We had a lot of saves like that. So anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I know there were times I was low on fuel, and because I couldn't leave the tick. And I remember one night where I'm like, hey, can you just like drag me towards my divert base or back towards home? And then I can tank, you know, if something happens, I still have the fuel and, you know, bring you back. But, you know, that's a great segue too into my time in the Thunderbirds.
Mm-hmm.
People would get so excited about, oh yeah, you know, you fly like a 42-minute flight. Well, guess what? I land and I give it back to my awesome crew chiefs, and they're going to spend like 6, 8, 10 hours on this airplane so that we can go fly a 45-minute show. And I think that too, you know, the general public doesn't understand how much support you get from like maintenance, especially to make these planes fly. And all those wonderful systems on the F-16, a lot of it's, avionics, and a lot of it's really delicate. And you need a really strong group of professionals to keep those aircraft airborne.
And the other thing I remember too, Blaze, is they showed up like 3 hours prior to get the jet ready.
Oh, and you give them the keys at the end of the sortie, like they're there all night too, you know, hours afterwards to fix
polishing the airplane and doing all kinds of stuff. There's one crew chief I'll never forget. That was the first time I flew a combat support mission, was the opening night of Desert Storm, refueling the Wild Weasels going into Baghdad. I will never forget this gal as long as I live. Her name was Peterson, Lonnie Peterson. I remember asking her one question because I knew her reputation. I said, Vonnie, is this jet ready to go? I said, Captain Hasera, this jet is ready to go into combat. I said, well, that's exactly what it's doing. And I remember walking around, doing the walk around with her, Blaze. And she just beamed when she heard what it was going to do. I said, your airplane's going to make Air Force history tonight. You know, the crew chiefs, you never hear about the crew chiefs. You never hear about how long they're out there in all the different types of weather, downpours, snow, whatever. All right. I'm glad that you gave a shout out to the crew chiefs, because really the airplane revolves around them. It doesn't revolve around the pilots at all.
No.
You know, it really doesn't. So, so when you left the F-16 at Hill, where did you go next?
I went to Shepherd Air Force Base. So that's kind of an interesting
school.
Yep. I taught NATO Joint Jet pilot training, but I was pregnant when I left my assignment at Hill, and nobody wanted to hire a pregnant F-16 pilot because I had to go through like a complete transition course. There weren't a lot of Guard or Reserve units that even had a woman in the unit. And so I think they were a little bit nervous about that. Squadron at Shepherd couldn't hire me fast enough. So it was really wonderful to get to go back. And like we talked about the T-38, that first love, get in that plane and start to teach again and meet some international students and other instructors. It just was a whole different environment. And it was really great too. And especially after all the things that having a baby does to your brain, to go back to something I like knew to my core had internalized was really great. So I couldn't appreciate that opportunity more.
Explain to the listeners what Euro-NATO jet joint training is, because that's a very unique thing that happens here in the United States.
Yeah, so that's at Shepherd Air Force Base, and there's a number of NATO countries, and I can try to list them, but I'm sure I'll forget some and things have missed. You have quite a few NATO countries that participate in that. So you can walk into a flight room and have a German flight commander and a Dutch stand-eval officer. And we had like Italian students and Spanish students, and there were Canadians there. And so just all these different NATO countries will send their students to the US to go through pilot training. So you do that. And I was actually in the reserves at that time. So I taught the simulators also as a government contractor. And so it was great. 1 week I did, or 2 weeks I did like 40 emergency procedure simulators with students. So I really knew the airplane inside and out. And then I would go across the parking lot, throw in my green flight suit, and then get to fly. And I get some great students. I had a tendency, because I'd previously been a check pilot and I had a lot of instructor time and more patience than maybe some other people. So I'd get to fly with some of the students who needed to see things from a different perspective. And, you know, like, I'm not scared.
What she's trying to tell you is the people that needed help, like me.
Yeah. You know, and it's a great plane, but it requires a lot of respect and a lot of attention. And it's very easy to get yourself into a bad situation with it. So that's why the new T7 can't come on board fast enough. So, yeah.
We had a Class A when I was going through, and the instructor was flying from the back seat and stalled it on final turn, classic final turn stall. You're right. There was one time I was out in the areas and I stalled the airplane. I stalled the T-38 doing something stupid. And I remember just going into a big circle for about 10 minutes going, I just scared the crap out of myself. Okay. Because you're right. It's a very unforgiving airplane. Yeah. Particularly when it's slow.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. I tried to bend over the top on a maneuver where I was too slow. And the airplane's just going like that. And I remember rolling out.
Yeah. It's all energy management.
Good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment.
Yeah. I think also better lucky than good sometimes gets us through, right?
Yeah. Isn't that the truth? So while you were there is when you applied for the Thunderbirds, correct?
Yeah, I did. So I was a reserve officer, actually. My son was like 2 years old, I think. And I was at home, and I was working as a flight manual manager too for all the foreign military sales F-16. And not a lot of people were working from home back then. This was 2008 or 2009, 10 timeframe. Yeah. So I received a magazine from the Air Force Reserve called Citizen Airman. And somewhere in that magazine was an article about a guy named Stroker Gustafson, and he was the first reserve officer to fly on the Thunderbirds. And I was like, holy cow. And it was just boom, this kind of spark lit another fire in me. I'm sure I was like holding my baby at the time. And I'm like, I want to go do that. Like, I want to, the Thunderbirds were a big part of me wanting to go in the Air Force. It was never my goal to be a Thunderbird. And when people talk to me like, oh, I want to be a Thunderbird, I'm like, I think that's great. I think it's wonderful, but you really need to have your goal to be, to be the best warrior you can be. And that's what makes the best Thunderbird too. Right. So I saw this article that there was a reservist flying on the team. And when the next mailing, they kind of send this mass mailer to the people that they select to apply for the team. I didn't get it, but my girlfriend got it and she forwarded it to me. And so I applied and went through that whole process. Luckily, I had the support of both my reserve chain of command as well as my active duty chain of command. And some of them had kind of witnessed the successes of me and my squadron in Iraq. And so I really had a lot of great backing from both the reserve and active duty leadership to kind of propel me towards the team.
Tell everybody how that you have to make a package, because it's a selectively manned position, or whatever they call it now.
Yeah.
So you had to actually draft a package up and compete.
Yes.
Obviously, your file got pulled out of the stack. What happens then?
My year, and it's a very difficult assignment, and you're traveling a lot. And so you need the right person with the right skills, with a very patient family or whatever your life situation is to be able to go do that. But I've heard that there's been fewer and fewer applicants, which is kind of tough right now for the team. But my year, we had 38 applicants. That was back in 2011, 10 or 11, 2011. So they picked like a dozen of us to go, and they basically run you through a whole like air show weekend. So we would show up on Wednesday, and that's when Thunderbird 8 will arrive to a show, and you help Thunderbird 8. And it was a female at the time, pretty cool. So Mother Hubbard showed us like how she measures everything out, and she works with her crew chief, and how they get the cars prepared and how they work with the site to give them training for any kind of mishaps or, needing to extract somebody from an aircraft, all the media, the rooms, like you name it. Thunderbird 8 has a really important job and covers a lot of ground to prep the battlefield, if you will, for when the Thunderbirds arrive. So Thursday, the team will arrive. The airlifter pulls up first that brings all the support for the Thunderbirds. And they have all the luggage on. And it's like one of the coolest things I've ever seen in the Air Force. This plane lands, and within like 30 minutes, all the bags are in the right cars and all the tools are in the right spot and all the radios are set up and like everything that needs to happen. There's a, whole like command center and everything's done within like a half an hour, 45 minutes. And then the other 7 jets will arrive. Thunderbird 7 will land, and then Thunderbirds 1 through 6 will do like a pre-show survey where they look, you can do everything if you had to off the green goo, as long as the green goo doesn't drift, where the show center is and where the other points are. But you go out there and you look at the mileage and you look for the ground references because you want to be visual outside the cockpit completely if you can.
So you're showing up and doing mission planning, aren't you?
Well, I mean, you're showing up and just doing a survey, but you already had like a great map of everything and everything's drawn out. So we've already reviewed it. Now you're just getting eyeballs on it because it might look a little different than whenever, whoever Google or whoever took the picture. If it's a different season. And then we would land and get out of the plane. And sometimes you flew 5 hours from Las Vegas to Miami, and there's like someone there who wants to get an interview with you. So you're like, I'm gonna pull my hair back and put on my lip gloss and get out of the jet, with a big smile. And a lot of times the hardest question they could ask you is like, oh, where were you last week? And you're like, I forgot. You literally write it on the top of your thing. Like, where was I? Okay. Yeah. I was in Oklahoma City last week or whatever. Cause they all blurred together. And I just spent some time with a friend who just recently left the team, and we were both joking too. Like, one of the hardest things on the Thunderbirds was remembering your room number because you're in a different hotel room every week. You're like, oh, like I got to write that down somewhere so I remember what room I'm going back to after we go out to dinner. So there's just so many of them, but it was fun, and the flying was fun, and we're doing the same thing over and over and over again. But I tell you what, Cheyenne, Wyoming at 7,000 feet and it's 100 degrees. It's like way different than flying over like Virginia Beach at sea level and high rise buildings and boats that like things that move sometimes and birds and, mountains and Colorado Springs and all the different terrain and the different environmentals and the birds and the buildings and all of those things would make each show site very unique and kept you really having to pay attention,
and see,
even though it was the same thing.
About that. People don't think about that. From one show site to the next, you'll be at sea level or you'll be at 7,000 feet. Yeah. That's just, and the airplane flies a little different.
Like Cheyenne, Wyoming, like we had a day in Colorado Springs too, when we were practicing for the academy. It was so bad. We decided not to do any over the top maneuvers because you're like, it'd be like being on an airliner at 30,000 feet and trying to like get any kind of control authority. Like those controls get very mushy, at those low density altitude and the high temperatures. So
and everybody just thinks, well, you go to afterburner, just go to afterburner. Well, you've only got so much gas on the plane too. Because,
and then it's only so effective too when there's not that much air to flow through to begin with. So they were all like very unique and it was fun. Even though you're repeating the same thing over and over again, you didn't get bored because you had like new things to look at and new challenges to overcome to make the show just right.
You told me something in a phone call. Tell everybody where you found out what you were doing when you found out you're going to be on the team. This is a really cool story.
So I had been working with my squadron commander. Obviously, he pushed me and helped promote me and wrote me a great letter of recommendation to get to the team. And so I had a little bit of a say that I might be getting some good news, but I was at Disneyland with my son and we rode like his very first roller coaster. We left the roller coaster and we were walking somewhere else. And I was literally in Cinderella's castle when my phone rings, and it was the executive officer for the Thunderbirds and saying, hey, Major Jensen, please stand by. I have, all of the Thunderbirds are on the phone for you. And it's Disneyland. So there's kids and everything's crazy. And I like go and tuck myself into a corner of Cinderella's castle with my phone in one ear and my finger in the other so I can hear. And Thunderbird number 1 through Thunderbird 12, all the officers got on the phone and one by one congratulated me for being accepted to the team. And I was just like, man, I feel like Cinderella, right? To go from, I don't know, it was so special to be picked up for the team. It was a really cool place. The Disney folks love it when I tell that story too.
I'll bet they do.
But my feet were like floating, right? And I'm like not on the ground, and we start walking back, and I have a 3-year-old, pretty young.
Yeah.
He brought me back to earth because he had a blowout in his diaper that was so bad it went out the back of his shirt. And so it's like, your number one job is to be a mom, It was pretty funny, but we definitely celebrated, and it was a lot of hard work, and it was hard to be away from him. But I think he definitely appreciated that, and he knew that it was important to me. It was important to our Air Force. It's important to recruiting for an all volunteer force that we have, to be able to go and represent the men and women in the Air Force was such a huge honor. And it was a great experience for both him and I.
Oh, I'll bet. There's a picture behind you of Finn pointing. Mm-hmm. Tell that story. Okay. Because you're always around the media. This is a really good media story.
Okay. Well, I was separated from my son, and he was about 6 years old at the time. He was with Grandpa, and I had him in his little flight suit, and he actually had on some patches from my fighter squadron in Korea, the 35th Fighter Squadron Pantons, Push It Up. So he was wearing that, and I think he had like a Thunderbird patch, super cute little, blonde-haired, blue-eyed little munchkin running around the flight line with Grandpa. And a news reporter from Fox 5 in Las Vegas saw him and thought, oh, this is a great like man on the street interview. So he stops them, and my dad said the reporter seemed like a little bit of disbelief and maybe slightly condescending. I was like, oh, well, little boy, like, what's your favorite part about an air show? My son loves helicopters. He loves cotton candy. He loves guns. Like, all of these things were there. But that day he's like, my favorite part about the air show is when my mom flies. And the man goes, oh, really? What does your mom fly? And he goes, she flies one of those. And he points off into the distance, and camera view, you can see this little blonde haired boy with like the military cut in the finger pointing, and off in the distance, you can see the red nose of the Thunderbird F-16 and the canopy open. And that night on the news report, it cut to a scene. It goes, for the record, his mom flies one of these. And you see this, like this huge like Thunderbird pass. So he became a little media star that day. But it was the perfect cherry on top of a wonderful assignment with the Thunderbirds, to have him like recognize what I had done. And I was on the team during sequestration, so we actually got held over for a third year. So just that extra year of maturity in a little boy, for him to fully understand what was going on as much as a 6-year-old can, that was really neat.
Oh, I'll bet. That's why I like that picture there behind you. Yeah. He's just pointing, and it's like he's got his finger like right on the red nose of the airplane too. I mean, that's just fantastic. So, well, we've been going for an hour.
Okay.
I don't know how much time you had. We just scheduled this. So you're standing in front of a class of boys and girls, 12, 15 years old. What would you tell them? All of the classes, like, they want to be pilots, they want to come into the Air Force. What are some of the things that you would tell them at that age, getting ready to become pilots themselves?
So I think for pilots at any age, and I'm glad you say boys and girls too. I think, and I just went to a women in aviation conference, and it was beautiful and wonderful and awesome, but I'm also a boy mom, and I want to raise a young man who won't limit the women in his lives in any way. And I know that I'm successful in doing that.
Touche.
But definitely just reach out to mentors and look for someone to mentor you, and don't be afraid to ask questions. People want to help you. So I think women, it's good to have another female mentor, but I had a lot of really fantastic male mentorship in my life because there wasn't a huge pool of military women flying, although I did seek some really amazing women that did mentor me. But don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to look for scholarships. Like I said, flying is really, really, really expensive thing to get into. There's programs out there. There's people who realize that there's a huge pilot shortage in our country right now. There's ways that programs that are trying to get young kids access to flying and to materials and academics. So the EAA Young Eagles is a great place where you can get a free flight and get access to a whole bunch of ground school for free. So there are ways, even if your parents didn't have much money, mine were teachers, and we just didn't have a lot of extra cash to throw into flying, anything. So look for those mentors and people who can help inspire you. And, I definitely had people in my career that said no. They didn't think women should fly. They didn't think women should fly in combat. They didn't think women should be in the military. They didn't think I had what it take, I would have what it would take to do what I've done. And, but there were people who really supported me. So if you get told no, or if someone puts you down, just go talk to somebody else and talk to someone who's doing it, because they will definitely support you and help show you the path.
I read an article not too long ago where it said that the airline community will need 600,000 pilots between now and like 2030. There is no better time to come into aviation than now.
Yep.
Yeah, it's expensive, but one of the Delta regional airlines here, Blaze, is actually paying for flight school for some of these people if they come in and sign a contract and come fly with one of these regional airlines. And that's a great way to get experience in flight time too.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, joining the Guard and the Reserve and to serve something that's bigger than yourself. I've paid for like 10 hours of flight time in my whole entire life. And I have like 3,600 hours worth of flying time in like advanced jet aircraft, multi-million-dollar airplanes. And I got to serve my country at the same time. Like it doesn't get better than that.
It doesn't. How many times were you and I sitting in a cockpit going, I can't believe they pay me to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Looking at things, going by in the world and then just going, man, I have a good life here.
Yeah.
I have a really good life here. Blaze, I want to thank you for being on today. Thank you very much for giving us some great words of wisdom, particularly great stories.
Oh, thanks, Look, it was really fun to be here. And what a great hour. It felt like 3 minutes. So
I know. I looked down at the clock on my phone. I'm like, we've been talking for over an hour already. All right.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
She and I continued talking after I had stopped recording. I want to pass along some things that she said that I think are really important. During the interview, she said, you're never alone up there, and you aren't. Even when I'm flying missions just going across the ocean, I'm talking to air traffic control. But in combat, I'm talking to F-15s, F-16s, AWACS, sometimes even the RC-135 rivet joint giving us warnings of something's going on around us. We are never alone, and the tanker is the most overprotected thing up there in the sky because everything runs on gas. During our conversation afterwards, she said something really interesting that kind of has stuck with me. That comment was, the jet doesn't care who's in the seat. It does not know if a man or woman is flying the airplane. And women have been flying in the United States Air Force for a long time. It sometimes surprises our coalition partners when they see a woman flying. The jet just does whatever the pilot tells it to do. Go up, go down, go fast, go slow. It doesn't distinguish between who is in the seat. I want to thank Blaze for being on today. This was really a fun interview. If you would like to hire her for a speaking event, you can contact her at her website, diamondechelonllc.com, and I have the link down in the show notes. I've also drawn 2 F-16s, one from Kunsan from the Pantons and one from the Fusions, armed the way that she talked about in the show, that you can purchase for the walls of your home, office, or hangar from our sponsor, wallpilot.com. Please share this episode and previous episodes, which can be found at my website, markhasera.com. It's been great to be here with you today, and look forward to talking to you next week when we have an F4 pilot on who also was very instrumental in bringing the E-8 Joint Stars online in Desert Storm when it was still a brand new airplane, still a prototype, and we were using it for the very first time. And now we'd never go to war without it. Thanks again for being here. Talk to you again next week.